Ave Maria, this is Father Angelo for Standing Fast. It's been more than a year since I've posted, and after this long hiatus, I'm back again with Standing Fast 2.0, so it's going to be a new version, YouTube style, no green screen, just very simple, so that I can get it done and have a video up every week. And today is the feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, and she is the patroness of Mary Victrix. We follow the Spirit of Lepanto, which is the spirit of Marian chivalry, and the story of Lepanto is really iconic of the spirituality of Marian chivalry, because it is a spirituality of both action and prayer. And the way that the feast developed over the centuries is kind of a sign of what I'm talking about, because originally the feast was Our Lady of Victory, and it was instituted on October 7th in order to commemorate the victory of the Christian fleet at the Battle of Lepanto on October 7th, 1571. And the Christian fleet was sent there as the Holy League, comprised of many Christian nations like Spain and the Republic of Venice and the Knights of Malta, Sicily and Naples, in order to overcome the threat to Christendom by the Ottoman Empire. So the Christian fleet met the Turkish fleet in the Bay of Lepanto on the morning of October 7, 1571, and they defeated the Muslims, largely because of the genius of Don Juan of Austria, this young man, 21 years old, 22 years old, who had a very wise plan, but it was also because of the prayers of the Christian faithful. St. Pius V, who had called the Holy League, these nation-states together, he had asked all of Christendom, and especially the soldiers and the generals, to pray for victory. And on the morning where the Christian fleet met the Turks in the Bay of Lepanto, Our Blessed Lady intervened, and the wind changed in the favor of the Christians, and they were able to rout the Turkish fleet easily. In fact, on the morning of the victory, St. Pius X was in his room at the Vatican, and he went to the window and he saw a vision of the victory, and he got down on his knees and he thanked God for the intercession of the Blessed Mother and the victory of the Christian forces. And this is the way it's always been, even the way that the Rosary came to us, because the feast of Our Lady of Victory is also the feast of Our Lady of the Rosary. The name of the feast was changed later on because the victory was obtained through the praying of the Rosary. Even the way the Rosary came to us through St. Dominic illustrates the same thing. St. Dominic was a man of action. He was in southern France preaching to the Albigensian heretics, preaching the truth of the gospel and calling them to conversion back to the Catholic faith. And he was having a very difficult time, and there were threats of violence. And he prayed to the Blessed Mother because he didn't want to see violence. And he asked her to intervene because his efforts were largely without fruit. So he prayed to the Blessed Mother, and she intervened. She intervened in his life and in the lives of those he was preaching to, and she gave him the Holy Rosary, and she said, use this. So he propagated the Rosary to the heretics, and they were converted. They were brought back to the Christian faith, largely again through the intercession of Our Blessed Mother. So he was a man of action, but he realized in his humility that there was very little he could do by himself. So he turned to the Blessed Mother, and she interceded for him, and she brought about conversion. So we have to be men of action. We have to confront the evils of our times. And there are many fights that we find ourselves in for the dignity of the human person and the right to life, for the sanctity of marriage and family life. We fight for the independence of the church, religious liberty. And it's a very difficult fight. But we always have to make sure that we are fighting God's fight, not our own fight. And that the deep and ultimate motive for everything that we do is charity. Because in the end, our real enemies are not of this world. They are the principalities of the world of darkness. Our enemy is Satan, and he wants us to go to hell. He wants everyone to lose their souls. And he is a lot smarter than any of us. And he can influence everyone, not just those who are doing his work willingly, but even those of us who are trying to do God's will, trying to fight the good fight, sometimes can get led astray. We get taken away from our duties and from preserving our own spiritual life, and we get involved in fights that are perhaps not the will of God. We got to do God's work and not our own, and that's why the Feast of Our Lady of Victory is also the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, because before anything else we need to pray and ask for God's grace. There's a great book that St. Pius X recommended, which was written by a friend of his, Dom Chautard, called The Soul of the Apostolate. And this book is really about success in the apostolate. But it's not about a method of the apostolate. It's about really how to preserve one's own spiritual life and be an effective apostle. And so St. Pius X kept this book at his bedside, and he read from it frequently. He highly recommended it. And it's a book that you can read from cover to cover, or you can read it by looking at the index. And I'll provide a link to Amazon.com where you can find the book and get it. But it's very important. It's a great, great book. And it helps us to engage effectively as men of action, but putting prayer before anything else, because that's really the strategy that is going to win the battle. St. Maximilian was asked, how do we win the spiritual battle? And he quoted and paraphrased Napoleon, because one time Napoleon was asked, how do you win a war? And he said, you need three things. You need three things. Number one, you need money. Number two, you need money. And number three, you need more money. And so that question was asked to St. Maximilian, how do you win the spiritual battle? And St. Maximilian said, you need prayer, and you need more prayer. Because it's a supernatural battle. It's God's battle, and we can't win it without His grace. We have to put our spiritual life first. We have to become saints. St. Maximilian Kolbe was an effective apostolate, but his first rule of life was, I must be a saint, and I must be a great saint. So that should be our goal as well. Also, St. Maximilian Kolbe said that our strategy in the spiritual life should be, number one, prayer. I've explained the reason why for that. And he said, number two, it should be mortification, because we need to have a disciplined way of life. We need to be soldiers for God. Now that means we need to be able to say no to ourselves when the chips are down. We need to take the harder road. And that means on a daily basis that we need to practice self-denial. We need to practice spiritual discipline. It's just like anything else. If you want to be good at sports, you got to practice. If you want to lose weight, you got to have the pain of exercise. If you want to make money, you've got to be financially disciplined. Just like anything else, we've got to invest ourselves in our spiritual life through a life of mortification. St. Maximilian said the last thing that we need to have is charity. Not only for God, but also for our neighbor. Because in the end, Jesus Christ died for us while we were in our sins. He died for us not because we were His friends, but in spite of the fact that we were His enemies, and His death made us His friends. So we need to have the same charity towards one another. We need to invest ourselves in the good of our brothers and sisters, and especially those who are furthest away from God. That's the spirituality that we need to have. That's the spirit of Lepanto. It is a spirit of action, but it is also a spirit of prayer. Before anything else, it is the spirit of prayer, and that is what is going to win us the victory. So until next time, this is Father Angelo for Standing Fast. God bless you, and Ave Maria.